Right, so a little bit more than the others. Not to say this is emotional, because emotion and investments don't go well together. But I started Bitstocks with a vision. I had a fundamental issue with how society is constructed. I had a fundamental issue, especially with how the financial system within society is constructed. When I was 16 years old, if you were to ask me, what do you wish to do? I would have sat in front of you, wet behind the ears, eyes wide open, and said, I want to be an investment banker, or I want to at least work at a hedge fund. And I held on to that for years. For years I held on to that. But I was also a nerd. So my first business was actually when I was 16 and I was doing computers. Something called overclocking, but I won't bore you with the details. But I slowly but surely built up my business, eventually reached out over into China, experienced international business, and also the issues with the financial system when trying to run a business as a young entrepreneur. Done very well up until the age of around about 20 years old, recession happened, and I lost my shirt. So I came back to the UK essentially with my tail in between my legs, and for the first time ever in my life, I decided that I needed a job. And that's a big thing for me, and I appreciate for the majority of people in this room that may not really sound that big a deal. But for me, that was a really, really big deal. I am really not a conformist. And in my head, I set a goal and I went out to achieve that goal, and then I realized that what was a humbling experience is that there's a beauty within failure. Unless you're talking about how the financial system is run. And through my journey, even though I was really, really tech-centric, I still aspired to be in some way, shape or form involved in the financial markets. So my idea of fun as a 17, 18-year-old kid wasn't running around with the people from school drinking, smoking, and just causing havoc in a park. I was sitting down with the Financial Times, a highlighter pen, and a whiteboard. Didn't really have that much money, but I created a fictitious portfolio and I'll analyze it on a bi-weekly basis to see how I would have done if I was to actually get involved in that market. But as I was doing that, and I thought, this is actually how finance works. This is really what finance is all about. Then I came across something called the zeitgeist, which exposed the financial system for what it really is. And what it revealed in that documentary was a document called Modern Money Mechanics. And that is the semantics behind how the financial system actually works. The fact that it's truly fictitious, the fact that every pound, dollar, yen in circulation is owed to somebody by somebody. It's essentially debt. And if all debts were paid off, there would be no money. That then made me think about my childhood and what shaped my fascination to be an entrepreneur and what made me want to become successful. And I didn't come from a wealthy household. I most certainly didn't. And I saw what happened when there was no money in my household. Certain situations will present themselves within my household that maybe wouldn't have presented themselves if we had money. Because I directly saw the correlation in my own household between money and happiness. And when money wasn't there, there seemed to be a lack of happiness, right? As an 8-year-old kid, you assume that money is happiness. Then as you grow up, you really realize that that's pretty naive, right? There's so much more to that. And at its root, through my journey and my understanding, I learned that at its root, all money actually is, at its core, is tokenized time. You have enough of it, you have enough time. How you deploy that time is what will depend if you find your fulfillment. And what I want to do before I touch into the future of Bitstocks, where it is we're going, the solutions to some of the issues that we've seen in this last quarter, I want to remind people as to why I created Bitstocks in the first place. It is an answer. It is a solution. It is a new way of building a bank. I don't want to work for an investment bank anymore. I want to build one. And that is what Bitstocks is, okay? So in order to understand that, we have to understand this. This governs everything. This is the global pyramid of power. At the very top, you have the powerful families, the divine right to rule that they trace back through their bloodline, and that puts them by birthright into default positions of power. Then their mechanism to maintain that power is world financial control. The World Bank, Bank of International Settlements, central banks, the IMF, and the interest rates that they control and taxes that they impose. Below that level, you have world resource control. What we consume, what we eat, what we drink, commodities. Below that, you then have world population control, the perpetuation mechanism to maintain the two higher echelons of the pyramid, religion, government, education, and then the distribution mechanism, which is media. 90% of Western media is owned by only 6 corporations. It is very easy for a narrative to be pushed upon us, and for this power structure to be maintained due to the misinformation that is actually being perpetuated. And below that, guess where we are? Right? Yeah, we are the debt slaves. And the issue with that is because we are so weighed down with the burdens of the monetary system that we don't really get to ask the kind of questions that I want to provoke in the minds today. And I know for the most part, everyone in this room understands this because you guys are involved in crypto. You guys understood the message of Bitstocks before others did, right? You guys are actually supporting this with your capital. I'm not saying that you don't know this stuff. I'm here to remind you as to why we're here, what Bitcoin is truly all about, and how Bitstocks fits into that. So to give you a scenario, who remembers this? Right? This was the internet before the internet. When I was doing my homework, I was searching through Britannia, right? That was our Google. And then if I want to be really sophisticated and boot up my Windows 95 machine, I would load up in Carter 96. And trust me, I wasn't really using it for the education. There was a couple games on there. And that's what I was more interested in, right? Much to the detriment of my parents. But this was how it was so easy for the power structure to control the narrative, because we didn't have any reference points. We couldn't communicate directly. We couldn't communicate on a peer-to-peer basis. So I remember when I must have been about 13 years old, I was in history class at school, and I really like history, and to this day, it's probably one of my passions. But one thing that I could never accept was essentially what my teacher was telling me and what was written in these history books. Because is this genuinely history, or is this his story? And what I mean by that is the majority of our history is written by the victor. If there is a conflict, the person who won the conflict got the right to write what the events were and how they transpired. And then that is what's then perpetuated to us as fact. And the reason why I worked this out as a kid wasn't because I was some super genius. I've been involved in conflicts on the playground. And if I go home and my dad asks me, what happened, right? If I was the antagonist, there's no way I'm telling my dad I was the antagonist. I'm sorry, I'm changing history. It's now his story, right? We've all done it. So why do you think at the highest level of our society, with the biggest, deepest implications, that they won't do it? So let's look at a couple examples. So who in this room could tell me the origins of Hollywood? And I'm sure this is not a trick question, because if you type it in Google, it gives you a wrong answer. Please.
Hollywood was a housing development. They put the sign up as advertising and it stayed.
Absolutely. So very, very similar story like that comes up when I put that question into Google. So I said, Google, what's the origins of Hollywood? And what Google comes out with is the history of Hollywood, California. Hollywood was established in 1853 with a single adobe hut on a land outside Los Angeles. Growing crops was so successful that by 1870, Hollywood became a thriving agricultural community. This was the first official document with the name Hollywood printed on it. That sounds nice, very warm, fuzzy, humble. But history or history? So I had to look a little bit deeper. And when I looked a little bit deeper, I realized I have to talk about the Druids. And a Druid was a member of the high-ranking professional class in ancient Celtic cultures. While perhaps best remembered as religious leaders, there were also legal authorities, adjudicators, law keepers, medical professionals, and political advisors. So how does that transpire into Hollywood? Well, the truth is, the Druids were also tree worshippers, especially the oak. The holly was their most sacred symbol because it was sacred to Mother Holly, or Hel, the Norse goddess of the underworld. Thus we have Holly or Hollywood, Hellwood, the place of magic. So in ancient Nordic traditions, the sorcerer's wand will be made from the wood of a holly tree. A sorcerer's role was to cast spells. Hollywood's role in our society is to cast mass spells on our social consciousness. So, history or history, let's look at an example. J.K. Rowling knew this. In 1990, she said that I gave Harry a wand made of Hollywood back in 1990 when I first drafted Chapter 6 of the Philosopher's Stone. It was not an arbitrary decision, meaning it is incredibly deliberate. Holly has certain connotations that were a perfect fit for Harry. Maybe coincidence. So this I actually had to deal with for the majority of my life. I've been on this journey for about 15 years. For about at least 7 and 8 of those, everyone assumed that I need to be wearing one of those, right? So let me give you a couple more examples before you think I'm like way too far out here, man. I thought we're here to talk about Bitcoin and our portfolio. I assure you, this all ties in. So let's look at some examples. So, Fight Club, the last scene in Fight Club, a movie made in 1999, you have in the final scene the Twin Towers collapsing as they're looking out on the horizon. So, maybe a coincidence, but then let's look at another example. In 1999, you had the movie The Matrix, and in this scene when Neo's mouth was essentially smelting, that's not really that significant, but what was significant, what was then showed around this scene by the agent was his passport. And on his passport, you could see September 11th, 2001. Again, a movie that was made in 1999. Again, coincidence? Let's look at another example. Now a movie made in 1985, Back to the Future. And in this scene in Back to the Future, you have Twin Pines Mall. And not necessarily anything too suspect here, apart from the fact that it's Twin Towers there. Well, let's rotate the image. And if you rotate the image, you can see that the time of 1:16 is actually indicating 9/11. Again, maybe just a coincidence. But then what happens after Marty actually gets to the mall is there's a terrorist attack. And that terrorist attack was orchestrated by Muslim terrorists. And after the terrorist attack, the scene then flips. And the Twin Pines Mall, all of a sudden, is no longer called Twin Pines Mall. It's now all of a sudden become the Lone Pines Mall. And what you have is, in the replacement of the Twin Towers, is a single tower has been erected, the Lone Tower, in replacement of the Twin Towers. 1985, this was actually out there. And if that still doesn't spark, is this history or his story, then let's look at an actual example of a card game, an Illuminati card game in the 1980s, and this was two of the cards in a deck. You have the towers collapsing, and as I'm sure everyone in this room also remembers, it wasn't just the towers that collapsed on that day, it was also the Pentagon that was attacked as well. So again, I ask, history or his story? And this is the issue, is that with this construct of how society is orchestrated, who has got the time to do what I've done? Like, who's really that sad in this society to be sitting down and be working out where does Hollywood really originate from, and how does this piece into everything else, and what else are they lying to us about? Is the monetary system a distraction mechanism? So this individual, Alan Greenspan, he was actually the Federal Reserve chair from 1987 leading up to 2006. In an interview, which I'm sure he really wished did not become famous, he was asked by a reporter, what is the proper relationship? Meaning, what should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and the president of the United States? Alan Greenspan, unfortunately to him, very famously responded, well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, meaning it's separate from the government. It's a privately run corporation. And that means that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. The magnitude of that statement should shake our bones. Our monetary policy is not even dictated by the people in government who we elect to be the greatest representatives of the people that they claim to govern. They're not even in control of the monetary system. Private organizations are in control of that monetary system. So as long as that is in place, and there is no evidence that the administration, the Congress, or anybody else is requesting that we do these things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are, frankly, don't matter. He is above the President of the United States. And then he goes on to say, I've had very good relationships with presidents. Well, of course you have very good relationships with presidents. I'm pretty sure they put Apple on your desk every morning, right? So this is the huge issue, because that monetary system isn't built with an equilibrium. It's not built to be neutral. That monetary system, because it is based upon debt, and we are going out trading our time under the guise of labor to achieve these financial tokens, which actually have zero intrinsic value. It is unfortunately the modern interpretation of slavery. It is financial slavery. Look at the symptoms. When you are employed, who employs you? You speak to the HR department of a corporation. HR stands for human resources, meaning human beings are resources. And then you're going out and trading on time under the guise of labor for these financial tokens, and then perpetuated through the world population control mechanism, being religion, government, and education and media, is that they indoctrinate us to believe that we go through this financial system, and the only time that you can actually have sovereignty freedom is post-retirement age. In the UK, it's meant to be 55 years plus. You look at the statistics, it's a lot closer to 70 years. But now we're too old to really appreciate the freedom that we've now gleaned. And if you really think about it, we already know this. And I can prove that in the actions that we take. Any aspiring wealthy individual, which this room is full of them, if this room really thinks about this, we ask this question to anybody else, why is it that we wish to aspire to become wealthy? Two categories form. One group will be pursuit and consolidation of power, people who love this pyramid, not the people I want to be having a beer with. The majority of us and everybody else will be, I want to spend more time with my kids. I want to spend more time with my family, my loved ones. I want to travel the world. I want to pursue my passions in life. Essentially, what it is that we're saying is we need to obtain enough of this fictitious thing called money so we can deploy our time as we see fit. So we are saying that we are going to buy our own freedom, and once we have purchased it, then we get to do what we want to do, right? And that is the huge issue within societies, because even if you are able to get ahead and actually able to build wealth, you actually don't even feel secure with the wealth that you've built, because it's a double-edged sword. Because your next behavioral instinct is, I need to protect it. My house is centralized to a global centralized to a database. The land in which it sits on is also linked to that database. If I give my money to a bank, guess what? It ain't my bloody money anymore, right? So what do? Trust structures, offshore shell structures. We buy gold. We invest in commodities, assets which we feel are not as easily obtainable. You guys already know this. We all already know this. We innately don't trust the system. And that is what that feeling is in the pit of your stomach. And now what we're having with where this is really going is how that voice is now being gifted a voice due to the internet. So this is an example of World Resource Control. These are the 10 corporations which I assure you probably cover 90% of everything you've eaten or drunk in the last week. 10 corporations own the majority of all the food brands, and these are the culprits. So this structure has maintained its monopoly due to absolutely nailing every single one of these components and having complete control over these components, and predominantly it's a distribution mechanism. If it wasn't for the distribution mechanism being world population control, the rest of the system really would fall. And the first gauntlet, the first huge chunk that got laid down in that armor was the internet. The internet was the first ring of sovereignty. The internet allowed us to circumvent this hierarchical corporate structure and these organizations, and allowed us to communicate on a peer-to-peer basis. If I don't trust the narrative, the public narrative of what happened in 9/11, I can reach out to someone who may have actually been witness to what happened in 9/11. If I don't believe the public narrative as to what happened in the recent Las Vegas shootings, then I can reach out on a peer-to-peer basis and I can ask the question. And then obviously the new one is the conflict with Russia, which I guess you guys probably wouldn't have guessed. I don't believe the public narrative, right? And this is the power that the internet has afforded. By not having any centralized point of control, no centralized point where governments, nation states, or corrupt corporations can point a gun at, it allows humanity to now educate ourselves and circumvent that narrative. Millennials are products of the internet. While we might be the ninja generation, we are most certainly the most sovereign generation when it comes to intellect, because we weren't limited to Encarta and solely limited to Britannia. We now have this really as the first ring of sovereignty. Now, as amazing as the internet is, it genuinely wasn't all things to all people. It isn't complete. And the reason why I say this is that internet is still, in terms of economics at least, limited by birth advantage. So economic activity and inclusion is determined on your place of birth. I was really fortunate that my parents decided to get together in the UK, right? Because by them getting together in the UK, this is where I popped out, right? And I then inherited the freedom that the UK system has to afford. I can very easily transfer money in and out of the system. I can very easily set up a global stock portfolio, obviously not that I would, there's crypto, and I could be trading global stocks in a matter of minutes. I could even send money overseas with a degree of friction, but I can do it, right? That constitutes, unfortunately, the minority of our global population. There's 7.5 billion people on the planet. The people who have the freedom that emulates ours is actually only around about 2.5 billion of that population. It is the minority very much at the expense of the majority. And what restricts this is that if you're an entrepreneur, with the invention of the internet, you can get your idea out to the world without requesting permission. You don't need it. Even if you live in the favelas of Brazil, you can get out your idea to the world and you don't need permission. You could even deliver a product if it's in digital form. Ebooks on financial tyranny. You can distribute that via email. What you can't do is send and receive value. Because in order to send and receive value, what you require is to pass AML KYC. Passport, utility bill. Well, the majority of people, just due to birthright, cannot place and provide that information. Therefore, they are alienated. And these people can't trade. So they are really under the full weight of that financial period, that global pyramid of control. because they can't even compete. And intellect is no longer monopolized. That is decentralized. That doesn't mean that they're not educated. Some of these people are far more educated than all of us in this room, myself most certainly included, but yet they can't trade. So when we're talking about permission, we're talking about permission ultimately from these culprits. And in the foyer, I was actually having a couple of conversations with a few individuals about their experiences that they have had with these companies. So when it is that we want to engage in commerce over the internet, we have to request permission from financial institutions, PayPal, WorldPay, and banks, who essentially determine your fee based on your risk profile as a business. So they want to know the nature of your business, they want to know what products or services it is that you offer, then naturally they want to know who you then offer them to, right? And then you need to factor in that even if you are granted that permission, every 1 in 100 transactions will be subject to a chargeback. If that goes to 2 or 3 in 100, then they will actually revoke access and it will revoke your account. So the system is just really, really not conducive to be able to build on the internet. And the reason why that is that I don't care if it's PayPal, WorldPay, Apple Pay, Google Pay. I don't care what fancy wrapper they wrap the turd in. That's technology that was invented 70 years ago with the Diners Club. The internet wasn't even a figment of our imagination 70 years ago, which is why innately it does not work. It means that companies need to pool all of this financial data, this sensitive financial data, and store it on centralized databases and servers, which is wonderful for a hacker. You put all of the sensitive stuff in one spot. I just need to attack that one spot, which is why time and time again, these companies are being breached and this information is sold on the internet. And before you know it, you're chilling, watching EastEnders, enjoying a cup of tea in your slippers, and somehow you get a phone call from your bank asking you if you bought 2 bottles of Dom Perignon in a Las Vegas casino, right? It's because fundamentally this technology does not work. So corporations are frustrated by this technology as well, because bear in mind, I said 7.5 billion people on the planet. These corporations therefore can only trade with essentially 2.5 billion of those, which completely stifles the economic reach of the internet today. Businesses want to trade. They're not necessarily interested in all the politics. They want to trade. The more people that can trade, that means more to their bottom line. So if we can create a system where the other 5 billion people can trade, businesses are super excited about this, as opposed to what they're experiencing right now. That bottle symbolizes the internet. The body of the bottle symbolizes the internet, and the companies within that bottle are the companies that are trying to really glean the freedom and the benefits of what the internet has to afford. The funnel is the restrictive process imposed on the internet by these financial companies, PayPal, your WorldPays, and the like. So that means you just can't build a business to be truly global because you're limited by those who you can serve in the forms of credit or debit card or PayPal payments. This individual worked that out. In 1999, the late Milton Freeman, who was an economist and a Nobel Prize winner, an absolute genius of his time, he actually famously said the one thing that is still missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash. A method whereby on the internet you could transfer value from A to B without B knowing A or A knowing B. In layman's terms, what Milton Freeman was speaking about here is that from the internet, we will have a black swan moment where you will have the digital equivalent of taking a £5 note out of your pocket and deposit it into, say, a homeless person's cup. When you do that transaction, there is no financial mediator involved. You don't know that person doesn't know you. But yet, you've just gifted value completely anonymously without any mediation. Milton Freeman predicted accurately that we'll be able to simulate that type of cash transaction over the internet. And that is genuinely what created the missing piece to this protocol puzzle that is the internet. So these are all the underlying protocols. I know everyone here is a Bitstocks client, so you guys will be very familiar with this diagram here. But the internet was finally completed when money joined the protocol puzzle. And that is what Bitcoin is. And these tokens that we can trade as monetary units, because they can simulate digital cash, also have a plethora of different use cases. And that really is not the chink on the armor, that is chopping off the arms, the legs, and eventually the head of the traditional financial system. And that really is what completes this, because we no longer now need to worry about human beings being put into positions of power and then providing very loose regulation to prevent them of abusing that power. We no longer need a system of trust. We now have a system that doesn't require you to trust. As long as you can have faith that 1 + 1 = 2, you can trust cryptography. It really is as simple as that. And the byproduct of having that system means financial neutrality, it means genuine sovereignty, and it means having a permissionless system and a borderless system. The default mechanism of what Bitcoin gifted to the world is genuine sovereignty. For the first time ever, what you own is what you own, without question. And that is an incredibly powerful concept. And that is genuinely now why I created Bitstocks. I had a vision that by interlinking these two ring systems, these two tools of humanity, by literally just going like this, we now have the necessary prerequisites where I no longer need to think that if I want to get exposure to the banking world, that I need to go and work at an investment bank or a hedge fund. What I realized is that by combining these two systems, we can now build a bank that is fundamentally better. And by doing so, providing a financial system and access to a financial system that ultimately, in coordination with the information that is being spread with the internet, completely and utterly disseminates this world power control.